coming up next, I'm super excited to invite Holden. Holden is an open source software developer who specialized in Apache Spark. And a fun fact about Holden, she runs a scooter club called the Sparkling Pink Pandas. Hi, Holden.
Hi. Yeah, I really like my scooter club. If anyone's in San Francisco and looking for a scooter club to join after the pandemic is over, like, give me a shout.
Absolutely. After the pandemic is over, we're all going to run into the Sparkling Pink Pandas and dress accordingly, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And together with Holden, I would like to invite Cheryl Adams. Cheryl Adams is a data architect, and she recently launched a new podcast. Cheryl, would you like to share about your podcast?
Yeah, I'm so excited to be able to do this. I'm doing this podcast that's talking about mental health. I'm a huge mental health advocate, so I tell short stories about how we can manage some of life's everyday difficulties. So I'm super excited about it. I'm getting a lot of positive responses back.
Amazing. Well done. Well, we all definitely need more to care about ourselves a little bit more during this time as well. All right, Holden and Cheryl, take it away. The stage is yours.
Hey, Holden, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, you too. So exciting. Let's jump in and let's start talking about big data. Now, you and I kind of chatted about this before, but you told me that you think big data and AI traditionally didn't play together very well. How do you think that's changed?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of really exciting things that are happening here. One of them is the introduction of things like Apache Arrow that makes it possible for tools to work together. And that's just like traditionally, a lot of the AI tools have been built in Python for a variety of reasons. And a lot of the big data tools have been built in the JVM. And so with things like Arrow, we're finding it easier for these big data tools to work together with the AI tools. And this is super important because there's that there's the thing where the unreasonable power of large sample sizes, right? And so amazing algorithms on small amounts of data are kind of limited. And so this is really cool. And we're seeing this even in Spark, where Apache Arrow is now accelerating the user-defined functions. And it's really great to see these things being able to work together. And Spark has also added a new scheduler mechanism. So, for example, it traditionally in things like Spark and other things of this nature, like if you lose one piece of data, you can just recompute that piece of data. But if you're doing like something like iterative machine learning algorithm, if you lose one partition, right, like you can't always just recompute that partition, right? It's more like a wide transformation. And so you have to do a different kind of scheduling. And so I think we're starting to see these tools start to work together. And we're also seeing big data tools being made in Python itself without depending on the JVM. And I'm really excited for that, even though it means that I have a lot of stuff to learn. But that's okay. I love learning new things. So that's great. And I'm excited to learn a whole bunch of new stuff as well. So there's things like Dask, which is really cool. And then there's also things like Ray, and these things are sort of Python first tools that are pretty awesome. But I think they've got a lot of potential, and they also integrate a lot more with sort of traditional machine learning tools. So if you look at Dask, for example, it has a much closer integration with scikit-learn.
Man, all of that sounds so exciting, and we're going to touch a little bit later about the ability to kind of pivot and learn new things. And speaking of new things, let's talk about Spark. There's so much going on with Spark. What can you tell us? What are you excited about?
Yeah, so there are so many cool things that I'm excited about in Spark. And of course, I'm biased because I work on Spark a lot. So I think the things that I'm working on are super cool. So I'll start with that. So one of the things that I'm really excited about in Spark, specifically in the next version that'll come out sometime early next year, is we finally have, sorry, my apologies, added the ability to have intelligent dynamic scaling on Kubernetes. I think this is really important because we're seeing a lot of people migrate away from Yarn onto
Right,
Kubernetes
right.
clusters. Another thing that I think is really cool is, you know, when Spark was first made, it had the very reasonable assumption that, like, hey, we have to cover the situation of node failures, but node failures,
Mhm.
they're not going to be super common, right? Like we
Right.
need to handle them, but
Yes.
it's not going to be an all the time thing. But now that people are running more in situations where preemption is a thing, and that's often in the cloud, you like things that look like node failures, they're not actual failures, but you're being
Okay.
preempted, are super important, and they actually happen at much higher rates than historically Spark was built around. And so we've added support for doing more intelligent things when we know that we're going to be losing executors. And so I think that's really cool, and I think we're going to
Right.
start to see a lot more efficient use of resources. So I think that's really awesome.
So yeah, there's so much going on. And like you said, there's a lot to learn. And the interesting thing about technology is that it just keeps changing. So you can't stay in place and say, I only know this one thing, because all of
Yeah.
a sudden there's a new release, there's a new enhancement. Well, we're always improving. And speaking about that, and you mentioned machine learning, so I want to kind of step lightly into that space because I know it's pretty broad. Can
Yeah.
you talk about what's happening with the reproducible machine learning pipeline? That sounds
Totally.
fascinating.
So I have a lot of feelings here. And most of it comes from having written untitled -4-final-v2.ipython notebook far too many times in my life.
Okay.
And I think it's really cool that we have better tools. Not that Python notebooks are bad, but we've got tools to productionize them now. And I think it's one of those things where often when we see sort of an idea that is hitting its time, we'll go from having not many tools to having many
Right.
different tools to do the same thing at the same time.
Right.
And so Apache Airflow is really coming into its own. And we also see the same thing with Kubeflow coming into its own. And in fact, Kubeflow now actually supports multiple execution environments, because now there's so many different kinds of execution environments for pipelines.
Right.
And I think what's really cool with sort of Kubeflow's approach is that it's sort of like this, you can specify your pipelines in Python, it compiles down to like YAML. But the really cool
Mhm.
thing is it's sort of this focus on containerization, right?
Right.
Because we have this thing where, it works on my machine.
Yes.
And that's been okay for a long time, right?
Right.
But now that we're starting to make really, really important business decisions on this stuff, we can't
Mhm.
just depend on, the data scientists to come in on every
Right.
Tuesday and update their model. We actually need that to run on a predictable schedule, and we need to know if it breaks. And so I
Right.
think some of the really cool stuff here is that we've got pipelines, but we also are starting to see monitoring tools being built.
Oh, yes. Mhm.
And in Kubeflow, like one of the things that I think is really, really lovely about their pipelines, and specifically their examples, is it includes stuff like, even in their examples, like, hey, run the pipeline, and now we're going to validate the model that we built. Because that's a really important step that a lot of people have been doing manually. And so when they go to productionize their pipelines, they aren't
Right.
always doing. And so I think, and of course, I'm a little biased about Kubeflow because I wrote a book
Right.
about Kubeflow,
Yeah.
which I think is, of course, the gift of the holiday season.
Okay. Good plug. Good plug.
Yeah. So I really think that we should buy several copies of my latest book. And even if the person doesn't know, anything about computers, their cat will love
Okay.
the box that it comes in.
Right. Right. Well, that's great. And we know we all love our pets. They've definitely been essential in this pandemic season. Maybe we might be getting on their nerves, but we certainly love all of them and their presence. So that's great.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was thinking about as you talked about all these different technologies is I want to kind of touch on the learning experience, because
Yeah.
you know, I know that as we continue to learn, as a content developer here at Microsoft, I'm constantly learning and testing new technology. I want to know, what is your secret to stay relevant in all this space with everything changing so much? What worked for you? What doesn't?
Totally. So there are so many things which have not worked for me. But so one of the things is I love tutorials. I think they're great.
Hmm.
I think like getting to play with something is really good. But
Yes.
I think that there's a mindset that I only learned later on in my life that I really need to have when I'm picking up tutorials. And that
Mhm.
is that I'm going to do this tutorial, but I'm doing this tutorial to fix it or to make it better. Right. And that's because
Ah,
these things are changing so
hmm,
quickly.
right,
And if I go in with the mindset like, hey, I'm going to help this person update this tutorial, I pay a lot better attention. And
right,
also, then, like when I get frustrated and things are broken, I find that I get less frustrated, and it's just like, oh, cool, this is the thing that I'm going to fix. It's okay
right,
that I'm going to spend like 2 days on this step, which originally would have taken me like 5 minutes, but everything has changed underneath me. So I
right,
think
right.
having this mindset um, that it's a community and we're going to contribute to
Hmm.
improving
I
the
like that.
resources is
Yes.
really, really important when you're picking up open source tutorials.
I
Um,
love that. I love that perspective. That's really great.
yeah, it's totally changed my interaction with tutorials.
Hmm.
And it's really lovely. I think it's great. Of course, also I think books are amazing.
Right.
Um, oh, okay, cool. And we have a question from the community, but so
Oh,
we'll
great.
so the community is suggesting asking to suggest good documentation for Ray. And so Ray is one of the Python data tools that we were talking
Hmm.
about sort of
Yes.
briefly earlier. And so for a little bit of context, Ray has come out of not exactly the same lab, but pretty close to the same lab that Spark came out
Right.
of.
Hmm.
And so while I don't work on Ray a lot personally, I know some of the people involved with it.
Hmm.
And so there's a whole bunch of different resources for Ray. I think one of the things that's really important with early stage technologies like Ray is to join their Slack channel.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
and that's just
Yeah.
because things are changing so quickly that
Hmm.
even when you go and you have this learning mindset or fixing mindset with any of
Right.
their resources, there's a good chance that you're going to get stuck and it's just not going to
Right.
work. Um,
Oh, yeah.
and and being stuck and not having anyone to talk to, like even if you are trying
Horrible.
to fix things, it's horrible,
Hmm.
right?
Oh,
So
yes.
step one, go and join the Race Slack. Then there are some good tutorials, and so Dean made some excellent resources, and so if you search for Dean Wampler Ray, you can find some good stuff there. But Ray itself also has some good tutorials.
Right.
uh, I've found for me that with projects that are sort of at the phase where Ray is, though, um, what's really important is just honestly checking out the code.
Right.
And that's because the documentation and the releases are just not in sync at all.
Hmm.
Um, and and that totally makes sense, right? They're focused on moving their project forward because that's what they have to be, right?
Right.
Um, and so often with Ray, for example, like the documentation is generated on what is in the current development branch, but the
Right.
release it doesn't work like that at all. And
Right.
so when I was trying to get Ray working on Kubernetes, that was an issue that I ran into. But by joining the Slack, I was able to find out like, hey, the
Right.
reason why I'm running into these issues is like I really need to be running from source. I can't be running the latest stable release. I need
Right.
to be running from source.
Right. I
Um,
love the mention of Slack. I think that's such a great resource. I too have joined Slack channels, and I love the community effort of everyone kind of jumping in and helping, or you can ask questions and someone's there, or oftentimes it's the developers that are in the Slack channel as well because they're
totally.
gleaning from people. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. That energy is great. Yeah.
Yeah. I think especially for early stage stuff, like that's really
Hmm.
key because even if you don't think of yourself as contributing to open source, just by
Right.
asking questions about how this stuff is working, you are contributing, right? Because
Right.
I spend so much time working on Spark that there are just things that I don't see anymore, right? And
Right.
it's only when people come and ask me questions, I'm like, oh, yeah, this makes no
Right.
sense at all. We need to
Mhm.
fix this, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
and it's just super easy to get into this mindset of like, oh, sorry, my dog has decided that he wants to eat a box.
Oh, that's okay. Boxes are recyclable, so that's good.
Yeah, it's fine. Sorry, I just wanted
Looks
to
like
make
we've got
sure.
one. Oh, yeah, we'll definitely check on that. We got a question from the community. They want to know if
Sure.
Python is the future of programming. What's your thought on that?
I mean, I don't. How would I say this? So I'm very biased, right? So like this is very much my personal view, but I think that the future of programming is not one specific language.
Yes.
I think that our future is one where our tools are able to work together, regardless of what language
Like
they're
it.
written in. And
Yes.
I think that this is really important. And so, like, I think that Python has an amazing set of libraries and community built up around
Mhm.
machine learning. I think it's a fantastic language. But honestly, there are things that Python is not great at, right? And that's
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes the solution to that is not trying to fix Python, is trying to make Python work better together in an
Yes.
ecosystem of different tools, right? Like,
Right.
and I think that's really cool. That being said, like I think that we are going to see more and more things being built in Python,
Mhm.
especially now that Python 2 is finally gone. Thank you. I am so I have got so much old code that I'm going to delete. I'm so excited for this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great, and I think it takes us back to that first topic that we spoke about, playing well together. So
Yeah.
one language is not going to be completely exclusive and the end all solution to every technology fix that we're trying to make. So it's collectively working together. And I think at this point, I think we may be at time, although I could probably talk about this for another hour or so. But I want to thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and experiences in the space.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been
Yeah.
lovely to chat.
Yeah, great, so much. Let's see.
Hello. Well,
Hello.
it was super. Hi. It was super
Hey.
interesting to hear your thoughts. All the way from Ray and Dask and Apache Spark and how it connects to machine learning and
Right.
building data pipeline and building machine learning pipeline. And also, is the future is only in one language, or should we aim for more of a domain that we want to gain expertise in? So it was definitely illuminating and fun. Thank you so much, Holden and Cheryl. It was lovely to have you with us.
Thanks for
Hopefully,
having
we'll
us.
see you soon.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks.
Bye.
All right. And if you want to ask questions or learn more, you can always follow Holden and Cheryl on their Twitter, and also join our office hours on the dev.to, the box right there at the bottom. So you can scan it and ask all the questions you would like to ask them.